Hello there guys and welcome, it is Niran here, and today it is time for a roundup of the 2015 testing schedule in this winter. So I put up a poll on Twitter, a straw poll, asking what racing related video you would like to see today, and you chose this. So I'll be rounding up Jerez and both tests in Catalunya and going over my opinions and some of the times and such like, and some of the major talking points from the winter testing before, of course, Melbourne happens in just under 2 weeks from now. This, as I specified in the title, will only be pictures, so pictures only, because it's not televised, there's no footage around, so if you've come here looking for footage, then you're probably not going to find it, and you're probably not going to find it on any YouTube video that is around, so just bear that in mind, and it was in the title. Nevertheless, we're going to, of course, start off with the first test, which was at Jerez. There'll be some pictures in the background from the various tests, and all that sort of thing. So the major talking point at Jerez was probably the fact that Ferrari were quickest. Now, obviously, we can't take too many conclusions from testing. There's lots of differences. It's not a very good variable to compare a lot of the teams, because there's stuff like the fuel loads, the tyres that they run on, the settings. It's not like a qualifying session or a practice session where they're giving it full pelt. They're looking for different types of telemetry from different types of runs. So if you're going on a long run, probably not going to be setting the quickest of time. Sorry, I'm not that much of a guru on testing, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. Ferrari were, of course, fastest. Kimi Raikkonen with a 1:20.879, I do believe. Now, there were a lot of theories as to why Ferrari were like 2 seconds quicker than Mercedes. A lot of them considered the fact that Ferrari were going on glory runs, which basically means low fuel load, maxed out settings and the softest available tyre. Go out and do as quick a lap as you possibly can, not a particularly long run. And I think that was basically to appease new staff. Obviously, they've had a huge change in staff, and Ferrari, the Ferrari fans, they tend to expect quite a lot from their team, so this was probably a sort of an appeasement to their fans and the new, I think, is it technical director they've got, who's replaced Domenicali? I'm not entirely sure, I'm lost on that one, but I'm fairly sure that is the case. It does, however, look promising. The pace is there. It's just that I think really they were trying to appease the fans more than actually having consistent pace. Sauber were second, which was quite interesting as well. I don't really like their new livery they've brought out as well, to be honest with you. But this does look good. Again, it could be a similar thing. I think it was Felipe Nasr who did that lap. But it is looking good for Sauber. It's been very good across all the tests, which I'll get onto a little bit later. They've got some consistency and they've got some pace as well, although they did have a few technical issues, but that's always going to be the case when they're testing out the new cars. Mercedes were third, from Williams in fourth, then we had Toro Rosso fifth, Lotus in sixth, and Red Bull in seventh. Now, there's a few anomalies in there. Mainly being that Red Bull are down in 7th. They did have a few issues, Daniel Kvyat losing his front wing being one of them as well, and having to run or do a lot of laps. I think it was over 100 laps without a front wing, something along those lines. I can't quite remember, to be honest with you. It was a while ago, unfortunately, but there was some good consistent pace from Mercedes, Williams and Toro Rosso. Lotus looking okay as well. Of course, there was no Force India, I do believe, at this test. They arrived at Catalunya with their 2014 car and didn't actually get their 2015 car out until the second test in Catalunya, but it would be a struggle for McLaren at Jerez. Obviously, with that new Honda power unit, there's going to be some consistency issues. It's not something they've ventured into yet. I think they ran their Honda power unit at the Abu Dhabi test at the end of the 2014 season, but obviously with a new power unit, Honda haven't probably done too much development. It's bad enough for Renault, that's why Red Bull struggled so much, and now with a new power supplier coming in Honda, yes, there may be some pace, there might be an addition in horsepower and straight line speed, but the consistency isn't going to be there, and it probably isn't going to be there for the first few rounds of the season based on testing so far. McLaren were quite considerably off the pace, I think about 7 seconds off the pace of the best lap by Kimi Raikkonen, 4 seconds off the rest, I do believe. Not too many laps either, a lot of different issues for Jenson Button and Fernando Alonso. There is still potential there if they can get around the consistency issues, but for now it isn't looking fantastic. So that was pretty much the Jerez test summed up. Not too many incidents like there were last year, just general pace for Ferrari, consistency from Sauber, Mercedes and Williams, and struggles for Honda, and it would sort of continue that way into the first test at Catalunya. Now, the first thing to happen, or the big talking point at the start, was actually Lewis Hamilton being unwell, and this caused a bit of a merry-go-round in seats for Pascal Wehrlein, who is Mercedes test driver. He started in the Force India. I do believe this was on day 1 of the first Catalunya test, and had to jump into the Mercedes after about 9 or something like 11 laps, I think, for Lewis Hamilton. So Pascal Wehrlein had to jump into the Force India and jump into Mercedes, and Sergio Perez jumped into the Force India. Lotus showed some good pace, but Mercedes were pretty much the most consistent. I think they did the best mileage, the most amount of laps throughout that test, but Lotus showed a lot of good pace, a big improvement from Jerez, where they were sort of average, consistent but a bit average. Good pace though from Maldonado and Grosjean in Catalunya. Now, there was big improvement for Red Bull, of course, being 3rd fastest as well, rather than being 7th, of course, fastest in Jerez. Felipe Nasr was 4th, but was a little bit inconsistent and a little bit controversial in terms of his crash with Susie Wolff, who did 73 laps. That was on one of the days. I think that was on the day where she was taken out. Supposedly it was Felipe Nasr's fault. I don't know if it is. Obviously, I haven't seen any footage, but from journalists there at the time and people who were actually watching, it does appear as though Felipe Nasr closed in on Susie Wolff and didn't give her enough space. I, of course, don't know if that is the case. Force India was still, of course, in their 2014 car, which was, now I do worry for Force India, I've got to say, because they have literally done 2 or was it 3 days worth of testing in their 2015 car. They haven't got many funds going about at the moment. I actually think they'll be outdone by Lotus this year, although they do have the Mercedes power unit. Of course, Lotus have now switched over to that Mercedes power unit as well for this season. So I think Force India could be one of the biggest underachievers with the pace that Sauber are pulling out at the moment with Nasr and Ericsson. And the only thing that lets them down, really, as harsh as it may sound, for Sauber is actually their driver lineup. Nasr is a rookie at the end of the day. He might have a lot of raw pace, but he is a rookie, and Marcus Ericsson, of course, didn't really get used to the Caterham until last year. He's driving a new car this year, might not get used to it until the second half of, or the latter stages of this season, like was the case last year, whereas, of course, Force India have got Sergio Perez and Nico Hülkenberg, who can bring the best out of fairly unperforming, or underperforming, sorry, cars, as shown last year, when Force India didn't really do much development at all towards the second half of the season. That's completely off topic, however, because the biggest thing to happen in the Catalunya, or the first Catalunya test, was a crash for Fernando Alonso in his McLaren. Now, it seemed pretty inconspicuous at the time. It was a crash. It was turn 3, that long right-hander, and he hit the wall on the inside. Now, there were a lot of rumours flying about, like he passed out of the wheel, it was a steering failure, it was some sort of failure with the car. We never really found out, I don't think. We never actually found out what happened, because it was a really odd crash. Don't tend to crash at turn 3 and then hit the inside wall. It didn't make too much sense. Fernando Alonso was actually taken to hospital, airlifted to hospital at the time, suffering from concussion, I do believe, but made a full recovery, of course. He was absolutely fine and came out of hospital 2 days later. But yeah, yet another setback for McLaren, who showed a bit more pace in the first Catalunya test than was shown in Jerez, which was a bit of a catastrophe in the end, apart from day 4. And yeah, another setback for McLaren. The potential is there, but it's just not looking very consistent at the moment. But that was pretty much it for the first Catalunya test. And the second Catalunya test, we finally saw the new Force India. The VJ-M08 finally arrived on the scene. I think, was it day 2, or was it... It may actually have been day 1, I can't remember. It may have been day 1 or day 2. And the Force India arrived. It actually showed some pretty good consistency. I think making it into triple figures in terms of laps done, or laps completed, on all 3 or 4 days it was there. So it was looking consistent despite having not actually done any testing whatsoever. After a very quiet testing so far, it was actually Williams who pulled out most of the stops on day 1. They finally showed off a bit of pace on day 1, and were actually fastest on day 4 as well. Massa being fastest, I think, on day 1, and Bottas being fastest on day 4 on his super soft tyres. But I think the most ominous sign really was the fact that Mercedes finally, after sort of looking as if they were just waiting in the wings to show off their real pace, did finally deliver that on day 2 and day 3, and I think we're 1.2 seconds quicker than the rest of the field on day 2. which is extremely ominous. Bottas was the man who was second, so Williams were consistently there behind Mercedes, but still a long way off on days 2 and 3. We saw some Sauber consistency as per usual, as it would appear in this testing period so far, and the pace so far for them, for Nasr and Ericsson, is looking fairly promising indeed. The lack of pace, though, for the VJ-M08 is unsurprising, or otherwise known as the New Force India. It was consistent, there wasn't much pace there. Again, it's not surprising because they haven't tested it too much, so, you know, you can't really read that much into that because they're going to do a lot of development, of course, before the start of the season. And McLaren finally showed a bit of consistency up until day 4, where on day 1 they actually managed to do 101... day 2 they managed to get 101 laps in after only doing 7 on day 1, which almost summed up things pretty sweetly for McLaren, unfortunately. But day 2 was a lot more promising for them. There were problems for Red Bull and, as I just mentioned, McLaren on day 4. A few stoppages for them. Daniel Ricciardo right at the start of the day with, I think, was it an ERS failure right at the start of the day, having to be wheeled straight back into the pit lane, having come out of the pits. And I think that is pretty much it. Mercedes were again fastest on day 3 with Lewis Hamilton. And yeah, I think in terms of conclusions we can take from all 3 tests is that yet again Mercedes are out in front. From by what distance you can't really tell because they were very conservative for the first 2 tests completely. Ferrari looked to have improved quite significantly despite looking as if they were going on glory runs. They were still pretty quick through both the Catalunya tests. Williams look as if they've got a bit of pace now, although they were very quiet in Jerez and in the first Catalunya test, and Red Bull looking okay, but yet again some consistency issues, like was of course the case this time last year in the 2014 test with that new Renault power unit for the new ruling, of course, in 2014. So in terms of, like, if I were to rank them right now, it would probably be Mercedes, from Williams and Ferrari pretty much joint second, and then possibly Red Bull. Sauber and Lotus look as if they're the best of the rest. Toro Rosso as well, actually, they're looking pretty good too. They're looking very consistent. They're probably one of the most consistent teams so far this winter. I think it's going to be quite a close one. I think ignoring the inevitable Mercedes Constructors' Championship win, I think it will be quite close behind. Lotus look as if they've improved a bit as well, of course, with that new Mercedes power unit, but there is still the issue, of course, for Force India and McLaren. Force India with limited mileage or limited time running, and McLaren with, well, a similar thing, but mainly consistency issues. Those will probably be ironed out by the time we get to Melbourne, but for the first 4 Grand Prix of the season, you can probably expect to see a few mechanical failures for McLaren, and of course, a team that wasn't even in testing at all, Marussia Manor, or Manor Motorsport now. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how they do. They, of course, announced Will Stevens as their first driver earlier on this week. There's lots of rumours about Roberto Meri being their second driver. And who else? Who was the other person? I can't remember, unfortunately. Roberto Meri, I think, is the man who's been linked the most. So Ocon. So Esteban Ocon, the Lotus driver, I think, has been linked with it as well. But yeah, of course, a team that didn't turn up, we really can't expect too much from Manor if they even make it to Melbourne at all. I think even just getting within the 107% ruling in qualifying will be somewhat of an achievement for them, if that is even possible. Well, it will be quite interesting to see what happens, though, at Melbourne after this winter. Feel free to drop that in the comment section below as well, what you're expecting from Melbourne after testing, who you think will do well, who you think will do badly, and who you think will do in between. If you did enjoy this video, I know it's been quite lengthy. That's because I've had to go literally over every single day of every single test. I hope I didn't go over everything too quickly because of that, but it's something you guys wanted to see, so hopefully I have managed to do that pretty well. In the meantime, if you did enjoy this video, feel free to drop a like, comment about enjoying it if you enjoyed the video that much, as well as what you thought about testing and your predictions for the first Grand Prix in just under 2 weeks' time. Subscribe if you are new around here as well, but it has been a pleasure ranting at you guys today. Have a good day, enjoy yourselves, and goodbye.